What's the biggest mistake one can make in science?
Well, the biggest mistake in science is thinking you can do it all yourself.
Okay.
And not realizing the strength of collaborators and students that you have with you. From a PhD student's perspective, the biggest mistake you can do in science, I think, probably is not sort of planning out how you're going to move through your time that you have to get things done. It's very easy as a PhD student to sort of decide you're very interested in a topic and you're going to dive in and figure out everything about it. But in the long run, you always need to sort of cycle through things and produce products one by one, and hopefully over the time that you have your PhD, you can like not just sort of go really deeply into something, but actually sort of learn the process from A to Z of how you get scientific projects done. I mean, I think early on you have this freedom to explore, and you really should take that opportunity. But you need to sort of, from the early on perspective, you need to keep in mind that there's going to be a switch point where you need to switch on okay, it's time to get it done.
Do you think it's more difficult to learn maths as a biologist to learn biology from a maths or computer science background? I mean, there's
probably. I would say
sort of almost a consensus on this, but.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that it's harder to learn math as a biologist, especially if you don't find that you have sort of a native fluency with it, right?
Yeah.
But I had a lot of math to start with and went on further, so it was not. I wouldn't characterize it as hard for me to have done it. But I definitely think, from the standpoint of what you need to worry about getting, I think if you think you're going to want to do something with a lot of math in it, I would focus on getting that in terms of your coursework a little more than I would argue you should need to get all of the biology, because you can pick up the biology as you go along, as long as you have good collaborators who you can work with and communicate. I wouldn't at all diminish the idea that you should sort of be an expert in both. I think actually, a lot of the funding systems often say things like, we want to have funded someone from this field and someone from this field so we can get somewhere in the interface. And that can work with two people who really sort of click and really get along and have a way of communicating that's really special. But I think that's sort of the rare case rather than the common case. And the case where you really get advancement at the interdisciplinary frontier is when you have someone who really knows a lot of both things and pushes that frontier from a place of strength in both areas, because then you don't have this sort of communication back and forth issue. You really have someone who pushes forward. So from a student perspective, what I would say is, encourage your advisor to have you say, go work, if you're in a biology lab and collaborating with some mathematician or a statistician or a quantitative biologist or computer scientist, see if you can go spend some time in that computer science lab, or vice versa, because I think that's the way that you can get the most sort of native sense for how each field works, and then you become this interdisciplinary scientist who has knowledge in both areas, and that's where I think you're going to get the greatest innovation and ability to make new discoveries that are going to really advance science.
It's just that you have to manage your time very, very well.
Exactly. But, just dive in here and dive in there, I think, is the bottom line. I mean, you can't be an expert in everything. So figure out what things you want to really master and put together, and try to forge your own path with something like that. I think it's a good idea. So I think from my perspective, it's very important to make sure there's a complementarity. And fortunately, that's the same optimization that a student has to do. They need to look for a mentor who's going to provide the structure that they need if they need it, and that's not exactly me. I'm not a real structure person. Or the freedom if they need it, and that would be more the kind of student that I'd be looking for. They have to want freedom, but also want to make progress and be able to sort of to do that in the context of having the resources they need and the mentorship and interaction they need, but not necessarily someone who's going to say, I need this by Tuesday, I need that by Wednesday, I need this by Thursday. As a PhD student, biggest mistake? I think it might have been a little bit of when I think back on my PhD and think back on what might I have changed, I might have chosen a different committee than I had. I chose basically the smartest, most aggressive set of faculty that I could, who would really push me hard.
Young and ambitious.
Well, they weren't necessarily young, but they all wanted to impress each other. Yeah, I was ambitious, and I thought I could master anything. And you know, it's like choosing a partner for anything. What you really want to choose for a partner is someone who's going to provide useful help to you, not necessarily someone who's going to like give you flack, right? So you might feel like, oh, the flack will help strengthen me. But really, the process of doing science is all about getting to the next step and getting to the next step. And if you can get to the next step and the next step and the next step in a good way, then you're going to succeed and it's going to be great. So you don't need to think about it in terms of that oppositional sense. Like I sort of was like, I can survive the most rigorous committee that I can put together. I want that rigorous committee. And I think I might have been better off saying, like, oh, this guy's a really just helpful guy. That would be great. This person is going to be useful because of the specific knowledge they have. And this other person, I just really like hanging around with. And that would probably be a better choice of committee than what I set myself up with. On the other hand, you also need to be thoughtful about some of the, like, just science strategy. Like, it's useful to have people on your committee who can write you a really good letter and have a really good name to support you going on and things like that. So you can't completely ignore those other issues. But I think, that was probably the decision in my PhD that I sort of sometimes think I could have done better. Most of my PhD went very well. It was a really good time in my life, actually, so I don't have many thoughts exactly about that. I have more thoughts about being a young PI, like some of the things I could have done better. I definitely could have gotten more mentorship about how to write a grant at an earlier time. That would have been a really good thing for me. One of the things that I don't understand, or that I have a lot of trouble with, I think a lot of people do, is I can never reconstruct how I didn't know things before, right? So in general, if you can't reconstruct how you didn't know things before, it's very hard for me to figure out what the funny process by which I figured things out was. Obviously, I didn't know a lot of things I know now, but I don't know how I thought before the way I am now. So I don't know if I have many anecdotes. I'm not very good at recall.
That's an interesting observation. Does it make it more difficult to teach?
Yes, it does. But it depends on exactly what kind of teaching I'm doing. So I'll give you an example. I actually taught chemistry, high school chemistry once, and I was mostly a biology major. And the thing was, when I went to teach in high school, they needed someone to teach chemistry, and I was like, chemistry? That was always really easy for me. Surely I can teach chemistry. But then I got in front of the class, and I would say, okay, here's how you solve this chemical equation, like figure out how it's balanced, etc. And I've done that. Okay, everyone get that? And they would go, no. And I was just at a complete loss for what to do next. And so that was an instance where I had a lot of difficulty with the teaching, and I think it was partly because I didn't have a perspective on how someone else who didn't know that could learn it, right? For biology, I never found that was the same way, because for biology, you could come at it from one angle or come at it from another, get another biological example, et cetera, et cetera. So it sort of depended on what I was teaching, which thing I found the most ability to come across to students and explain.
How many hours a day did you work as a PhD student?
Gosh, I worked pretty hard.
I guess the optimal is individual, but...
Yeah, I mean, it depended on the time, and I wasn't the kind of PhD student who only did, worked on my PhD and that's it. Like, I was part of a drama troupe and, directed and acted in plays and things like that. But, that was like from 8 o'clock till 11 o'clock at night kind of thing that I would do those. And I was also running a lot, so I had a lot of other activities that I did. And sometimes I think my advisor wasn't entirely happy with that, but most of the time I think he understood that I was getting a lot done, and so he was pretty happy. And so, you got to mix your PhD with your life. But overall, it's a time when I think it's helpful if you don't have huge distractions and problems that prevent you from really being dedicated to the PhD. Fortunately for me, it was a time when I could really spend a lot of time most days working. And so, my day as a PhD student, often started pretty early. I remember in my second year, I would get up at like 6:30 or something, and I was taking a course in biochemistry. I'd read my biochemistry textbook, bike down to MIT for the course that I was taking, take that course, be back by 9:30, get into the lab, work all day in the lab, And then very often I would, if it was possible, the school I had, they really supported me in grad school to go out to dinner with visiting speakers or something like that and meet faculty even as a grad student, which is a really good idea. Go out, meet them, talk to them. So I'd go to dinner with them.
They're people too.
Yeah, they're people too, and they like to talk to students. And then I'd go out to dinner with them, and then I'd go to the library and I'd read papers for 3 hours, usually for papers, like I would read papers just because there was a visiting speaker coming in the next day, and I'd say, okay, I'm going to read 3 papers by that speaker so I know what they're talking about. And so when they would give a seminar, I would have some question to ask and stuff like that. And that kind of dedication to just sort of really mastering what you need to know for tomorrow every day really helped me sort of become someone who felt comfortable in the conversations that were going on among the PIs around me, etc., and made me sort of stand out a little bit as someone who knew what I was talking about at times. And so it's really that sort of sense of preparation, like prepare yourself for the next day, really can be useful. But it requires the dedication to have 3 hours in the evening to read 3 papers, and the discipline to read through them very carefully when you're a PhD student. When you get a little bit more advanced, you can read a paper a lot quicker. So that changes a little later, and that enables you to be a PI without having to spend that much time in the evening when someone's going to come by next time. But I think as a PhD student, at least for me, it was really helpful to dig deeply into the literature every time I could to be prepared for every encounter with someone that I had.
It seems to me that you need to have a very playful attitude towards learning and the scientific process to do that. Otherwise, you will tear yourself apart.
Yeah, there's this sort of contradiction in terms of playful discipline that I think is kind of necessary, right? You need to be disciplined in terms of not just frittering away your time, but playful in your attitude towards what you're doing. And if you can adopt a playful attitude while remaining focused on your goals, that's your best way of mastering what you need to master and becoming a successful scientist.
Do you find that most students have that or at all when they're coming in, or are they acquiring that over time?
I think it depends. Some students come in with the playfulness, not the discipline. Some students come in with the discipline and not the playfulness. And I think you just need to work towards what you need, which is a little bit of the backward statement, because you should always work from your strengths, I think, in any endeavor. So if you have a lot of discipline, what you want to do is work from the discipline to the strength. Don't say, if you have a lot of discipline and you need more playfulness, don't try to punish yourself for your discipline or get away from the discipline because you need to play. Stick with your discipline if you're good at that, but just sort of work towards finding ways to be playful within your discipline, the way that you discipline your life. And then
Right.
Conversely, if you find that you're a really playful person, but you want a lot of discipline, you're probably going to end up frustrated and unhappy if you suppress the playfulness. So don't suppress the playfulness, but just find ways, if you can, to structure yourself so that you get a little bit of discipline in what you do while retaining your playfulness.
Right, because you want to maintain sort of a stronghold and a sort of safe haven of this is what I am, this is what I can do, and sort of expand that rather than just throw yourself into the deep water. And
that's right. Be comfortable with who you are. That doesn't mean you can't make yourself even better, but you're going to make yourself better by finding things within yourself and finding your own skills based on your strengths. One of the nice things about, I would say, really higher education at the PhD level is that sometimes people come from all kinds of directions toward it, and they bring strengths to it that are not sort of necessarily classroom examination skills or the ability to impress teachers with their fluency in something, but something that's very special to them. And I think you want to treasure whatever you have that's special to you and help it grow, while at the same time sort of being aware of what the scientific system is, what the constraints are when you try to engage in science, and finding ways to maximize your scope for using your skills to contribute to science.
as a finishing note, you should probably introduce yourself.
So I'm Jeffrey Townsend. I'm a professor of biostatistics at Yale. but I'm a biology undergraduate major, an organismic and evolutionary biology PhD, who went on to a postdoc in plant and microbial biology, a first faculty position in molecular and cell biology, professorship in ecology and evolutionary biology, and now, as I mentioned, I'm in a biostatistics department. So I've had sort of a varied career leading me to my current position. I think I'm probably going to stick with the biostats position for a long time, but I'm definitely on the border of biostatistics, computational biology, even a little bit of, I have a lab where I grind things up and sequence their DNA and RNA. So sort of I've got my fingers in a lot of different pots, but I'm really happy to be doing what I'm doing right now. This life is a good one.
Thank you so much.